Greetings and welcome. My name is Jake Rayson. I'm a wildlife food forest garden designer, and I apologise for not having my mic turned on when I was live streaming a moment ago. So I'm just going to recap this. So the title of today is if you're going to plant edible trees. And if you're going to plant trees, but basically let nature do its thing, and you let nature decide what trees should grow in an area. That basically essentially rewild an area. Or if you're going to plant trees, actually physically dig a hole and put a tree in, then plant edible trees. And I'm going to go through the reasons why I think this as a broader as an idea. If you're going to plant trees, plant edible trees. Otherwise, let nature plant the trees. So there's a thing called rewilding. Started off in the States, has become really popular in the UK, and part because we are the most have the least nature in the whole of Europe. I think it's I'm not too sure the figures, maybe 3% coverage of woodland and 0.05% of ancient woodland. So it's very, very low compared to the rest of Europe. So that's why it's kind of really important here. There's a book by Isabella Tree, Rewilding, I think it's called, and it's about the Knepp estate, Knepp estate, and it's been very popular. And they basically let nature do its thing, and they did introduce cows into and larger livestock. But there is, I think you have to take it in the context. So I have some ambivalence about rewilding and just keeping humans out. I think it's part of the problem is that humans have been locked out of nature, and it's been treated as a Cartesian split between nature on the one side and humans on the other. Whereas, of course, we are nature. We come from nature. And we are an integral part of it, whether we admit to it or not. It is. The other thing I'd like to say as well, which kind of does get my goat a bit, is that people go to other places to see nature. There's a fantastic naturalist called Sophie Legule, and she did the kind of street art with chalk, naming the wild plants and giving them names. And you just look around and you see what plants are there and see what wildlife is right under your nose already. We are surrounded by nature. Now, the nature that we see has been massively affected by humans. So you look out the window, look at the landscape. This has been going on for millennia, and particularly in the past 300 years with industrialisation and enclosure in the UK, where fields have been created, and we have lost the commons. So I think what I'd rather see, rather than like rewilding and it's wild on one side and it's human on the other, is a more of an integration. So you're actually inviting humans into the space and treating the space respectfully and actually caring for the environment. And typical of this, there's a book, fantastic book called Tending the Wild by M. Cat Anderson. She's at University of California, but Davis University in California. Really, really good book, really interesting, is how the indigenous Americans managed the land for 10,000 years without messing it up. And there's an awful lot of lessons to be learned. Essentially, think of it's like a forest garden on a landscape scale. And there's a lot of what is called ecofascism in there. And I don't know much about this, so I won't. Yeah, but a chap called John Muir, I think it was John Muir. I'll be careful what I say. I think he was saying that the Yosemite National Park was too good for the indigenous people, and they should be kicked off. Could be wrong about that. Somebody said that. Anyway, but I think what they actually did was to encourage certain species, and they had controlled fires, and they would prune, like they did a lot of basket making, and they would prune different plants to encourage straight roots, and they would encourage roots that they're tubers and roots that they were wanting to eat. They would encourage those by weeding them, or there's a whole range of different things that they're doing. So it's like gardening but without boundaries, and just kind of fascinating in lots of different ways. And it's sustainable. It was going on for 10,000 years before the Europeans came over 300 years ago, and trash the joint in 300 years. Absolutely wipe pretty much all the bison out, and then just now we've got there's hardly any birds, there's hardly any wildlife left, and we've properly messed it up. So, well done, Europeans. So I think what actually we should be doing, rather than rewilding, we should be engaging people with the landscape, and not as like and this is why I love forest gardening so much. It's not like as an observer, it's as a participant. Yeah, you're in the garden and you are taking part. And I actually don't care how much of the garden you eat or not, but you're there and you're in the garden and you're kind of reacting with it. So yes, there's a lovely author of oh my goodness me, I've forgotten her name. There's this brilliant book about so I've got a bit of a brain fuzz. There's a brilliant book about gardening, forest gardening, the Garden of Delights by Anni, Kelsey, and I'll put that in the book. I'll put that in the notes as well. I've got a copy up here, and that's brilliant. I mean, Garden of Equal Delights, and she's great. I've got a lot of time for Annie because she talks about precisely that. You're part of the garden. So there's also varying degrees of intervention. We don't have the large, what are called key species, so we don't have bison roaming around anymore. We don't have boar, there's a few down in the Forest of Dean, and we don't have wolves. Beavers are only in a couple of different places. So there's a lot of kind of key species that aren't in the ecosystems, that aren't kind of interacting with the landscape. So humans have to take on that role. Some people want to introduce farm animals into that, but I just think, well, yeah, there is this idea that humans can intervene and be the key species, and humans can increase the biodiversity in an area if it's done thoughtfully and respectfully and properly. One of my favourite gardeners is a chap called John Little, Grass Roof Company, I think it is. And his big thing is about increasing biodiversity by increasing habitat, purposefully putting in extra habitat, and whether that's like whole bee, what they call them, bee hotels in posts in a bike stand, or nest boxes, or habitat piles, or mounds of sand, or hogging paths, made like gravel hogging paths. Or there's a whole range of different things that you could do. Standing deadwood, dead hedges. There's a whole load of stuff that you can do to bring that diversity into the garden. And it's kind of reflected in a lot of human artifacts in the landscape. For example, wrecks and old underwater wrecks and old industrial sites are some of the places with the most biodiversity, because there's an awful lot of structural diversity in there. So humans can have a positive effect on the environment, and that's what's to be encouraged. And it's that involvement, getting people involved. And again, I say the same thing for forest gardens, that you're thinking about deadwood, you're thinking about habitat piles, you're putting ground cover plants in, you're thinking about native plants. There's all this stuff going on, and you want people to do that and to think about the wildlife and their interaction with it. So on that kind of scale then, from like rewilding, don't let any humans in, let nature do its thing, through to human interventions, you can actually sow seeds. So we've got an acre or so of steep woodland here. And there was a lot of sycamore, which is a non-native species. I mean, it's good for biomass for insects, but doesn't support a massive range of species. And we want to encourage the native cherry and the native oak. So I've been going down, collecting acorns in a bucket, and then throwing the acorns in the gaps where the sycamores were. So there's a load of acorn saplings coming up in the woodland, and that's it. I just throw them on the ground, and there'll be more acorns there. And this kind of comes in. This is what we'd like to see. So across the UK, there's a tree, the black poplar, has really declined in numbers over the past couple hundred years, because it likes damp conditions, grown by waterways, and they've all been tidied up. So there's Professor Mary Gagan at Swansea University. I think it's her favourite tree, and it's to really encourage the planting of that particular tree in suitable habitat, because it's kind of on the danger list for trees. So again, you'd want to encourage that. You don't want to put in goat willow, which ain't never going to die out. You want to put in black poplars if you can. So it's that idea of like a thoughtful human intervention of putting a species in that makes sense in that landscape. Yeah. So that's the kind of key thing. So you're kind of sowing seed. Now the other thing really interesting is coppicing. So coppicing is where you have a woodland, and every few years, I think it's like 10 years, maybe 15 years, depending on what you're coppicing for, timber or poles or what it is that you're doing. The coppicer will cut down the trees, but leaving stumps. So you have like a hazel coppice or an oak coppice, and you'll take the oak tree down, but you don't kill it. You let it regrows, and it regrows straighter. And it's a long-term project, but what you're doing is creating more habitat, diverse habitat. It's like the edge of the woodland. I've got a friend of mine, David Hunter, is a woodland worker, does a lot of coppice work and roundwood buildings. Fantastic bloke. And I went to see his coppice down near Fishguard, and it was fascinating because big open area, and to the untrained eye, it's like it's a chaotic kind of. There's different trees going on. There's loads of foxgloves, loads of bramble, a bit of a path, and it's all kind of kicking off. But it's managed. It's a managed space. He's letting stuff come up, but it's also very managed. And he's like carefully pruning out certain trees and taking some stuff out and letting other stuff come through. Very much like the indigenous Americans with their various practices. Totally, I'll put a link to the book. It's online at archive.org. I'll put that in there. So by coppicing, it's sustainable, it's regenerative, it's actually adding to the landscape. It's not just like one form of woodland, it's like edge of woodland with a bigger diversity of species. Rather like meadows, increase the diversity of grassland, of different grassing species and different flower species and insects as well. So you want a range of habitat. It's not just one thing. It's not just woodland. It's like a range of different stuff. A diversity of habitat is what you're after. So it comes to the planting the edible trees. If you're going to go to the expense of planting trees, I think you really ought not nudge nature in a certain direction to help out with certain, like whether you're coppicing or whether there's a particular species that you want to re-establish in an area. But if you're going to go to the time and effort of planting trees, plant edible trees. Plant a forest garden. Get people involved in caring for it and harvesting it. Make it worthwhile. Make it worth people's while to get involved back in the landscape. Get people back out in the landscape. So this is the ideas. I've thought about this and I've discussed this with various people, but this is the thing. If you're going to plant trees, plant edible trees. If you're not going to plant trees, let nature do it, maybe with a bit of a helping hand. So there we go. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers, bye.